The morning mist hung heavy over the Eastern European countryside as Lieutenant Sarah Chun adjusted her helmet and checked her weapon for the third time. The radio crackled with static before her commanding officer's voice cut through the white noise like a knife. "Chun, listen carefully. Intelligence reports indicate enemy convoy movement along Route 7. Estimated 40-plus armored vehicles, including tanks, personnel carriers, and supply trucks. They're moving supplies to reinforce the northern front." Sarah pressed the radio button, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "Copy that, sir. What are my orders?" A pause. Then, almost dismissively, "Reconnaissance only. Do not engage. Those enemies are unbeatable with your current resources. Fall back and report positions." Sarah stared at the radio in disbelief. She had trained for years, mastered every weapon system in their arsenal, and proven herself in countless operations. Yet here she was, being told to run from a fight. "Sir, with respect, I have the new anti-tank guided missiles. The terrain favors ambush tactics." "I could negative, Chun. Those vehicles are heavily armored. You be throwing your life away." "That's an order. Observe and report, nothing more." The radio went silent. Sarah looked out across the rolling hills dotted with abandoned farmhouses and dense patches of woodland. Her mind raced, calculating angles, distances, and possibilities that her commanding officer couldn't see from his safe position 20 miles behind the lines. She had grown up in these types of landscapes, hunting with her father in the mountains of Colorado. Every ridge, every tree line, every shadow held tactical possibilities that textbook commanders never fully grasped. The enemy convoy would have to pass through a natural bottleneck where the road curved around Lake Miroslav. High ground on both sides, limited escape routes, and perfect sightlines. Sarah checked her watch. 0547 hours. According to intelligence, the convoy would reach the bottleneck at approximately 0630. 43 minutes to prepare what would either be the most successful ambush in recent military history or her final mission. She gathered her equipment methodically. The new Javelin anti-tank missiles were still considered experimental by command, but Sarah had spent weeks studying their capabilities. Fire and forget technology, top attack trajectory, and enough explosive power to disable even modern main battle tanks. She had 12 missiles, plus a rifle and sidearm. The terrain around Lake Miroslav consisted of 3 key positions. The northern ridge offered the highest vantage point, but would leave her exposed after the first shots. The southern tree line provided better cover, but limited her field of fire. The abandoned grain silo on the eastern approach gave her a middle ground, decent elevation, multiple escape routes, and clear views of the entire convoy route. Sarah made her choice and began moving toward the grain silo, her equipment weighing heavy on her back as she navigated through the early morning darkness. The old wooden structure had seen better days, with gaps in the walls that would provide perfect firing ports while maintaining concealment. As she climbed to the silo's second level, memories of her military training flooded back. The instructors at Fort Benning had always said that successful operations came down to 3 factors: preparation, positioning, and timing. Command might have written off this mission, but they hadn't seen what Sarah could see. From her elevated position, the entire valley spread out below her like a tactical map come to life. The road snaked through the landscape, crossing 2 small bridges and passing dangerously close to several potential ambush points. Enemy vehicles would be forced to maintain formation due to the narrow passage, making them predictable targets. Sarah set up her first firing position and began calculating wind speed, humidity, and target angles. The Javelin system's computer would handle most of the complex calculations, but understanding the environment could mean the difference between a successful hit and a wasted shot. At 0615 hours, she heard them before she saw them. The low rumble of diesel engines echoed across the valley, growing stronger as the convoy approached. Sarah peered through her scope and felt her breath catch. The intelligence reports had been wrong. This wasn't 40 vehicles, it was closer to 50, including several main battle tanks that looked like the latest Russian T-90 models. Her radio crackled again. "Chun, report status. Do you have eyes on the convoy?" Sarah hesitated. Protocol demanded that she report what she was seeing and request backup. But backup was hours away, and this convoy would be long gone, delivering critical supplies that could extend the conflict for months. Chun, respond immediately. She took a deep breath and made the decision that would define the rest of her military career. Copy command. I have visual confirmation. Beginning reconnaissance sweep. Will report findings upon completion. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Sarah switched off her radio and focused on the approaching convoy. The lead vehicles had just rounded the first bend, their commanders probably feeling secure in their overwhelming numbers and heavy armor. They had no idea that a single soldier with experimental weapons and an intimate knowledge of the terrain was about to turn their routine supply run into a nightmare. Sarah chambered her first missile and began tracking the lead tank, waiting for the perfect moment to prove that sometimes the impossible was just another word for unprepared. The convoy continued its steady approach, engines growling through the morning air as 50 vehicles carried men and supplies toward what they believed would be another successful mission. None of them suspected that their unbeatable formation was about to face a test that would be talked about in military academies for years to come. Sarah steadied her breathing and watched through her scope as the lead tank entered the optimal firing zone. In 60 seconds, she would either validate years of training and tactical innovation or become another casualty statistic in a conflict that had already claimed too many lives. The choice was hers, and she had already made it. Command might consider these enemies unbeatable, but Sarah Chun was about to prove that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who refuses to accept defeat before the battle even begins. Her finger found the trigger as the first target moved into perfect position, and 18 minutes of controlled chaos was about to begin. The first missile left its launcher at exactly 0632 hours with a soft whoosh that barely disturbed the morning silence. Sarah watched through her scope as the javelin arced high into the sky, its computer brain calculating the perfect angle to strike the lead tank's weakest point, the thin armor on top of its turret. 3 seconds later, the explosion lit up the valley like an early sunrise. The T-90's turret separated from its chassis in a spectacular fireball that sent shrapnel raining down on the vehicles behind it. The convoy immediately ground to a halt as confused voices crackled across enemy radio frequencies. Sarah was already moving to her second position inside the silo. Years of training had taught her that successful ambush tactics required constant repositioning. Stay in one place too long, and return fire would find you quickly. The second missile acquired its target, a personnel carrier packed with infantry, before the echoes of the first explosion had faded. Another direct hit. The vehicle's rear doors flew open as soldiers scrambled to escape the burning wreckage, only to find themselves exposed in an open field with no cover. Enemy commanders were shouting orders now, trying to identify where the attacks were coming from. Through her scope, Sarah could see tank turrets rotating wildly, searching for targets that weren't there. The convoy had spread out in defensive formation, but they were still trapped on the narrow road with water on one side and steep embankments on the other. Her third shot targeted the convoy's communication vehicle, a specialized truck bristling with antennas. Take out communications, and coordination collapses. The missile struck dead center, silencing the radio chatter that had been filling the airwaves with panicked reports. Now the real work began. With their communications severed, individual vehicle commanders had to make decisions without central coordination. Some tried to advance, others attempted to retreat, and a few simply stopped moving entirely as their crews struggled to understand what was happening. Sarah relocated to the north side of the silo, where gaps in the wooden walls provided a different angle on the convoy. The fourth missile found a supply truck loaded with ammunition. The secondary explosions from its cargo were so intense that windows shattered in abandoned buildings half a mile away. By now, some of the enemy soldiers had figured out the general direction of the attacks. Machine gun fire began peppering the silo's exterior, but the old building's thick walls absorbed most of the impact. Sarah had chosen her position well. The structure provided protection while offering multiple firing angles. Her fifth target was another main battle tank, this one attempting to bring its main gun to bear on her position. The Javelin's top attack trajectory made armor thickness irrelevant. The missile struck at the exact moment the tank's crew was loading a shell, and the resulting explosion was visible for miles. 6 minutes into the engagement, and 6 enemy vehicles were destroyed or disabled. But Sarah knew the real challenge was just beginning. The surviving vehicles were adapting, using smoke grenades to obscure her vision and attempting to coordinate their response despite their communication difficulties. She moved again, this time to the silo's eastern wall. Through a gap between wooden planks, she could see enemy infantry dismounting from their vehicles and beginning to advance on foot. They were finally implementing proper counter-ambush tactics, but they were several minutes too late. The 7th missile targeted a command vehicle that had been hanging back from the main convoy. Through her scope, Sarah could see officers inside gesturing frantically as they tried to establish some kind of tactical control. The missile ended their planning session permanently. Return fire was intensifying now. Rockets and tank shells were impacting all around the silo, filling the air with splinters and debris. One blast was close enough to knock Sarah off her feet, but she quickly recovered and continued working. Target number 8 was an anti-aircraft vehicle that had been trying to spot her with its sophisticated optics. Another direct hit eliminated that threat and sent its crew scrambling for cover behind a disabled truck. The convoy was in complete chaos now. Vehicles were burning throughout the valley, thick black smoke rising into the morning sky. Some crews had abandoned their equipment entirely and were fleeing on foot across the open fields. Others continued fighting with desperate determination, pouring fire toward the silo even as their formation disintegrated around them. Sarah's 9th shot destroyed a bridge repair vehicle, ensuring that the convoy couldn't simply bypass destroyed equipment by creating alternate routes. Every missile was serving a tactical purpose, methodically dismantling the enemy's capability to continue their mission. But ammunition was becoming a concern. She had 3 missiles remaining and more than 30 vehicles still operational. The survivors were getting smarter too, using terrain features for cover and coordinating their movements despite their communication problems. The 10th missile took out a fuel truck, creating a massive fireball that spread burning diesel across the road. The fire would force surviving vehicles to detour through softer ground where they might become stuck or expose themselves to additional attacks. Enemy infantry was getting closer now. Sarah could hear their voices calling to each other as they approached the silo from multiple directions. Time was running short, and she needed to maximize the impact of her final 2 missiles. Her 11th shot targeted the convoy's heaviest remaining tank, a massive vehicle that had been serving as a rallying point for the other crews. Its destruction sent a clear message that no vehicle was safe, no matter how heavily armored. 1 missile left, dozens of targets still moving. Sarah scanned the remaining vehicles through her scope, looking for the shot that would have the maximum psychological impact. Her training had taught her that sometimes the most important target wasn't the most dangerous one. It was the one whose destruction would break the enemy's will to continue fighting. She found it. A personnel carrier that had stopped in the center of the convoy, its crew apparently trying to coordinate a final assault on her position. Officers were standing outside the vehicle, pointing toward the silo and organizing what looked like a desperate last-ditch attack. The 12th and final Javelin missile streaked across the morning sky and struck with pinpoint accuracy. The explosion eliminated the convoy's remaining leadership and scattered the infantry assault before it could begin. 12 minutes into the engagement, and 12 vehicles destroyed. But Sarah wasn't finished yet. She still had her rifle, her sidearm, and intimate knowledge of terrain that the surviving enemies were just beginning to understand. The most dangerous part of her mission was about to begin, finishing what the missiles had started, one shot at a time, until 44 vehicles lay disabled in the valley below, and Command was forced to admit that sometimes the impossible was just another word for unprepared. The real test of her skills was about to begin, as return fire intensified and enemy infantry closed in on her position from all directions with her missiles exhausted. Sarah transitioned to her rifle, a modified precision weapon system that had served her well in countless previous operations. The challenge now was entirely different. Instead of engaging heavily armored vehicles with guided missiles, she needed to disable the remaining 32 vehicles using nothing but carefully placed shots and tactical intelligence. Her first rifle target was obvious, the driver of a supply truck that was attempting to reverse away from the carnage. A single shot through the engine block disabled the vehicle and forced its crew to abandon their position. The truck rolled backward into a drainage ditch, blocking the retreat route for several other vehicles. Enemy infantry was advancing on the silo from 3 directions now. Sarah could hear their boots crunching through the gravel and dead leaves as they tried to surround her position. Time to move again. She gathered her remaining equipment and climbed to the silo's uppermost level, where a maintenance ladder provided access to the roof. From her elevated position, the entire battlefield spread out below her like a deadly chess game. Smoke from burning vehicles obscured parts of the valley, but Sarah's training had taught her to use concealment as an advantage rather than an obstacle. She knew where every vehicle had been positioned before the smoke appeared, and burning wrecks created predictable shadows where surviving crews would seek cover. Her second rifle shot targeted the fuel tank of an armored personnel carrier. The vehicle didn't explode like in the movies. Instead, diesel fuel began pouring from the punctured tank, creating a slick that would make movement treacherous for nearby infantry. The crew would have to choose between staying with the immobilized vehicle or abandoning their protection. Below her, enemy soldiers had reached the base of the silo and were preparing to storm the building. What they didn't realize was that Sarah had anticipated this moment and prepared accordingly. During her initial reconnaissance of the position, she had identified structural weak points in the old building's foundation. 3 precisely placed shots into weathered support beams caused a section of the silo's exterior wall to collapse, trapping several attackers under heavy wooden debris and forcing the others to reconsider their approach. The psychological impact was just as important as the tactical advantage. Survivors would now have to wonder what other surprises awaited them. Her fourth vehicle target was an engineering vehicle equipped with a crane that enemy forces were trying to use as an impromptu observation post. The shot severed a critical hydraulic line, causing the crane's arm to drop suddenly and nearly crushing the soldiers who had been climbing it. Sarah's radio crackled back to life. She had forgotten that she'd switched it off earlier, and now her commanding officer's voice filled the air with barely controlled panic. Chun, respond immediately. We're receiving reports of massive explosions in your sector. What is your status? Sarah considered her options. She could maintain radio silence and continue her mission, or she could report what was actually happening and risk being ordered to withdraw. The convoy still had more than 30 operational vehicles, and her job wasn't finished. Command, this is Chun. I have engaged the enemy convoy. Significant damage inflicted. Continuing mission. A long pause. Then, incredulously, did you say you engaged? Soldier, you were ordered to observe only. What is your exact situation? 12 enemy vehicles destroyed, 32 remaining. No friendly casualties. Request permission to continue engagement. The silence on the radio lasted so long that Sarah wondered if the connection had been lost. When her commanding officer finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of disbelief, anger, and what might have been admiration. Chun, you are to withdraw immediately. Do not engage further. That is a direct order. Sarah looked down at the chaos she had created in the valley below. Burning vehicles, scattered equipment, and confused enemy soldiers who were still trying to understand how their overwhelming numerical advantage had been neutralized so quickly. Copy, Command. beginning withdrawal. She switched off the radio again. Sometimes following orders meant interpreting them creatively. She would withdraw, eventually, but first she had work to finish. Her fifth rifle target was the lead vehicle in a column that was trying to establish a new formation away from the main engagement area. A shot into the radiator caused steam to pour from under the hood, and the vehicle ground to a halt with a seized engine. Enemy return fire was becoming more organized now. Tank shells and rocket-propelled grenades were impacting closer to her position, and she could hear the distinctive whine of incoming mortar rounds. Time for another tactical relocation. Sarah rappelled down from the silo using a rope she had prepared earlier, landing in a drainage culvert that provided concealment and a protected route to her next position. Years of mountain climbing with her father had taught her that vertical movement often provided options that ground-bound opponents couldn't anticipate. The culvert led to an abandoned farmhouse about 200 meters from the silo. The building had been partially destroyed by earlier fighting, but its basement was intact and offered multiple firing positions through broken windows and shell holes. From her new location, Sarah had a different angle on the convoy. Several vehicles had moved to positions where the silo blocked her previous lines of sight, but now they were exposed to observation and fire from the east. Her sixth vehicle kill was another supply truck, this one carrying what appeared to be medical supplies based on the red crosses painted on its sides. International law prohibited targeting medical vehicles, but Sarah's scope revealed that the medical truck was actually carrying ammunition boxes disguised with medical markings, a war crime that voided any protection the vehicle might have claimed. The shot penetrated the truck's cab and disabled its steering mechanism. The vehicle veered off the road and rolled down an embankment, coming to rest upside down with its illegal cargo scattered across the hillside. By now, enemy commanders were beginning to understand the nature of their situation. Radio intercepts indicated they were calling for air support and additional ground forces. Sarah's window of opportunity was narrowing, but she still had work to do. Her seventh rifle target was a command vehicle that had positioned itself behind a stand of trees, thinking the natural cover would provide protection. Sarah's elevated position in the farmhouse allowed her to see over the tree line, and her shot found its mark in the vehicle's communications array. Enemy infantry was adapting too. Instead of advancing in large groups, they were now using small teams to probe her perimeter and identify her position. Sarah could see muzzle flashes as they fired exploratory shots toward any structure that might harbor a sniper. She needed to keep moving, keep them guessing, and continue degrading their capability until the mission was complete. 18 minutes had seemed like an impossible time frame when this engagement began, but Sarah was discovering that time moved differently when every second was focused on a clear objective. The hunt was far from over, and the most challenging targets still awaited her attention. 14 minutes into the engagement, Sarah faced her greatest challenge yet. The surviving enemy vehicles had reorganized into defensive positions, using the terrain and destroyed equipment as cover. Their initial shock was wearing off, replaced by determined professionalism as they adapted to her tactics. From the farmhouse basement, she could observe their new formation through a crack in the foundation wall. 3 main battle tanks had positioned themselves to provide overlapping fields of fire, while personnel carriers moved in coordinated patterns to avoid presenting stationary targets. These weren't panicked soldiers anymore. They were experienced fighters implementing textbook counter-sniper procedures. Her 8th rifle kill targeted a reconnaissance vehicle that was trying to flank her position. The shot disabled its tracks, leaving it immobilized but still functional as a firing position. The crew would have to choose between abandoning their equipment or staying to fight from a fixed location. Enemy mortar rounds were walking closer to the farmhouse. Sarah could feel the building shake with each impact as the bombardment crept systematically toward her position. She had perhaps 90 seconds before the structure became untenable. Her 9th target was an ammunition carrier that had stopped to resupply other vehicles. The risk was enormous. Hitting an ammunition truck could trigger a chain reaction that might damage friendly infrastructure, but the tactical value was too significant to ignore. Sarah aimed for the vehicle's engine compartment rather than its cargo area, disabling it without causing a catastrophic explosion. Time to move again. Sarah gathered her essential equipment and prepared to transition to her final firing position, an irrigation pipe that ran beneath the road connecting the valley to higher ground. The pipe was barely wide enough for a person, but it would provide concealment and an unexpected angle on enemy positions. As she crawled through the narrow concrete tube, Sarah could hear vehicles moving overhead. Tank tracks created a distinctive rumbling sound as they passed above her hiding spot, and she could distinguish the different engine signatures of various vehicle types. Her father had taught her to identify animals by their tracks and sounds while hunting. The same principles applied to mechanized warfare. The irrigation pipe emerged near a stone bridge that crossed a small creek. From this position, Sarah could see vehicles that had been hidden behind terrain features, and her new angle revealed weaknesses in their defensive formation. Her 10th rifle shot targeted the driver's vision port on a tank that was trying to coordinate the defensive effort. The bullet spiderwebbed the armored glass, forcing the crew to button up completely and rely on electronic systems that provided limited visibility. Return fire was immediate and intense. The enemy had finally pinpointed her general location, and multiple weapon systems were converging on the bridge area. Sarah could hear bullets whining overhead and impacting the stonework around her position. She identified her 11th target, a bridge-laying vehicle that enemy forces were positioning to create an alternate escape route. The shot severed a critical hydraulic line, causing the folding bridge to collapse and block the creek crossing that the vehicle had been trying to span. Enemy infantry was closing in on her position now. Sarah could see muzzle flashes as soldiers advanced through the underbrush along the creek bank, using practice fire and movement techniques to maintain suppression while advancing. These were professionals who understood small unit tactics and weren't making the mistakes that had characterized the earlier part of the engagement. Her 12th rifle target was a personnel carrier that was moving to support the infantry assault. The shot penetrated the vehicle's side armor at a weak point where maintenance panels created a thinner section, disabling its propulsion system and forcing its occupants to dismount under fire. 17 minutes into the engagement, Sarah's ammunition was running low, and she could count at least 20 vehicles still operational. The mathematics were becoming challenging. Too many targets, too little time, and enemy forces that were adapting faster than she could eliminate them. She needed to change tactics again. Instead of targeting individual vehicles, she needed to create conditions that would force multiple vehicles to become non-operational simultaneously. The terrain around the bridge offered one possibility. If she could damage the bridge structure itself, vehicles on the far side would be cut off from mutual support. Her 13th shot wasn't aimed at a vehicle at all. Instead, she targeted the bridge's keystone, the central structural element that supported the entire span. The bullet struck at exactly the right angle to create stress fractures that propagated through the ancient stonework. The bridge didn't collapse immediately, but it began to sag ominously under the weight of a tank that was crossing at that exact moment. Enemy engineers would have to decide whether to risk continuing to use the compromised structure or abandon vehicles on the wrong side of the creek. Sarah's radio crackled again. This time, it wasn't her commanding officer. It was an emergency frequency that indicated close air support was inbound to assist the convoy. Unknown sniper. This is Devil Dog 17. Approaching your position with close air support. Identify yourself immediately or be engaged as hostile. Air support changed everything. Even the most skilled ground fighter couldn't effectively engage aircraft with rifle fire. Sarah had perhaps 3 minutes before jets arrived on station and began attacking anything that looked like a threat to the convoy. But 3 minutes was enough time for a soldier who had already proven that impossible was just another word for unprepared. She identified her final targets rapidly, prioritizing vehicles that could still threaten friendly forces if they completed their mission. Her 14th rifle shot targeted a communications vehicle that had re-established contact with higher command. Without communications, the arriving aircraft would have difficulty coordinating with ground forces, potentially causing confusion that would work in Sarah's favor. 18 minutes. Time was almost up, but Sarah Chin wasn't finished yet. The most dangerous part of her mission lay ahead, evading enemy forces and air support while ensuring that her tactical victory became a strategic success that proved command wrong about what one determined soldier could accomplish against overwhelming odds. The sound of approaching aircraft grew louder, and Sarah prepared for the final phase of an engagement that would be studied in military academies for decades to come. 18 minutes and counting. Sarah could hear the distinct whine of approaching fighter jets as she prepared for the final phase of her impossible mission. The mathematics were stark. 6 targets remained operational. She had limited ammunition, and enemy air support would arrive within 90 seconds. But Sarah Chun had not survived this long by accepting limitations. She had trained for situations exactly like this, where success required not just tactical skill, but creative thinking under the most extreme pressure imaginable. Her 15th rifle shot targeted a fuel depot vehicle that had been serving as a mobile refueling station for other equipment. The bullet pierced the tank at precisely the right angle to create a pressurized fuel leak without triggering an explosion. Diesel fuel began spraying across the road, creating a slippery hazard that would force vehicles to reduce speed and limit their maneuverability. The sound of jet engines was growing louder. Sarah used the noise to mask her movement as she relocated one final time, sliding down the creek bank to a culvert that would provide protection from aerial observation while maintaining visual contact with the remaining targets. Her 16th shot disabled the main gun on a tank that had been providing covering fire for the infantry assault. The bullet struck the elevation mechanism, causing the barrel to drop and rendering the weapon inoperable. Without its primary armament, the tank became little more than an expensive personnel carrier. Enemy forces were calling in her approximate position to the approaching aircraft. Sarah could hear radio chatter as ground controllers tried to coordinate close air support strikes against her location. But the same terrain features that had made this valley perfect for an ambush were now working to her advantage. Steep hills and thick forest canopy would make it difficult for pilots to identify targets with certainty. Target 17 was another personnel carrier attempting to establish a firebase position. Sarah's shot penetrated the vehicle's ammunition storage compartment, not to cause an explosion, but to contaminate the remaining ammunition with dirt and debris that would make it unreliable in combat. The first fighter jet screamed overhead at low altitude, its pilot trying to visually acquire the sniper who had single-handedly devastated an entire convoy. Sarah pressed herself against the concrete culvert wall as the aircraft's afterburners lit up the sky above her hiding spot. 18 minutes exactly. Time was up according to the mission timeline, but Sarah still had work to finish. Her 18th rifle shot targeted a command vehicle's antenna array, severing the connection that enemy forces were using to coordinate with the arriving air support. The jet circled back for another pass, this time releasing flares that illuminated the entire valley in harsh white light. Sarah remained motionless in the culvert, knowing that movement would reveal her position to thermal imaging systems that could see through concealment that fooled the naked eye. But the flares also revealed something else, the true extent of the devastation she had inflicted. 41 vehicles destroyed or disabled, scattered throughout the valley like broken toys. Smoke from burning equipment created a haze that reduced visibility and confused targeting systems. Her 19th shot eliminated the last operational tank, targeting a critical hydraulic line that controlled the turret rotation system. Without the ability to traverse its main gun, the tank crew would have to constantly reposition the entire vehicle to engage different targets. The approaching fighter jet opened fire with its cannon, stitching a line of explosions across the hillside where enemy spotters thought they had seen muzzle flashes. The pilot was firing blind, hoping to suppress a target he couldn't positively identify. Sarah's 20th rifle shot was her most audacious yet. Instead of targeting another vehicle, she aimed at a fuel barrel that enemy forces had positioned near their command post. The bullet punctured the container, allowing aviation fuel to spill across the ground in a pattern that would be clearly visible to the aircraft overhead. When the pilot saw the fuel spill, he would naturally assume it indicated the location of a hidden enemy position. His next strafing run would target the fuel spill, inadvertently attacking the enemy command post that had positioned the fuel barrel in the first place. The deception worked perfectly. The jet's second pass concentrated fire on the command area, forcing enemy officers to abandon their coordination efforts and seek cover from their own air support. Confusion and friendly fire incidents were the inevitable result when ground-air coordination broke down. Target 21 was a recovery vehicle that enemy forces were using to extract disabled equipment. Sarah's shot severed the winch cable just as the vehicle was attempting to pull a damaged tank back into operational status. The sudden release of tension caused the cable to whip back and damage the recovery vehicle's own engine. By now, enemy forces were in full retreat. The combination of devastating ground fire and confusion with their own air support had broken the convoy's cohesion completely. Vehicles were scattering in all directions, abandoning equipment and supplies in their haste to escape the valley of destruction. Sarah's final rifle shots were almost anticlimactic. Targets 22 through 24 were all supply vehicles attempting to flee with critical equipment intact. Each shot disabled a key system, engine, steering, or transmission, leaving the vehicles immobilized but recoverable for friendly forces. The 25th and final shot wasn't aimed at a vehicle at all. Sarah fired into the air, a traditional hunter's salute that her father had taught her to mark the successful conclusion of a challenging hunt. In 18 minutes and 37 seconds, she had engaged and defeated a convoy that command had declared unbeatable. As the sound of the gunshot echoed across the valley, Sarah's radio crackled with an incoming transmission from a different frequency. It was a reconnaissance aircraft that had been monitoring the engagement from high altitude. Unknown friendly. This is Eagle Eye observing your sector. Confirm 44 enemy vehicles engaged, 44 enemy vehicles neutralized. Outstanding performance. Soldier. Command is requesting immediate extraction to your location. Sarah looked out across the valley one last time before responding. Smoke rose from dozens of destroyed vehicles, and the morning sun cast long shadows across a battlefield that would be studied and analyzed for years to come. Eagle Eye, this is Chun. Mission complete. Ready for extraction. The radio fell silent for a moment before crackling back to life with her commanding officer's voice, and for the first time since she had known him, he sounded genuinely impressed. Chun, this is Command. I owe you an apology. When I said those enemies were unbeatable, I was thinking like a commander who had forgotten what a single determined soldier could accomplish. You've just rewritten the tactical manual for asymmetric warfare. Sarah smiled as she gathered her equipment and prepared for extraction. Sometimes the most important battles weren't won by following orders. They were won by soldiers who understood that impossible was just another word for unprepared. The woman who had been told to run from a fight had instead proven that with the right combination of skill, determination, and tactical intelligence, even the most overwhelming odds could be overcome. Her name would be remembered not just as the soldier who destroyed 44 vehicles in 18 minutes, but as the warrior who proved that sometimes one person really could make all the difference. In military academies around the world, students would study the Battle of Lake Miroslav and learn that victory often belonged not to the largest army or the most advanced equipment, but to the fighter who refused to accept that any enemy was truly unbeatable. Sarah Chun had become a legend, and legends never die.